بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. Now in this discussion today we'll be covering the second pillar of Islam, which is the pillar of Salah. And we have to understand that Salah is one of the important 5 pillars of Islam. As we discussed before, that the 5 pillars of Islam are an obligation upon every single Muslim. Now, as we know that Salah is an obligation upon everyone, it's consensus of Muslims that it's been legislated to us to pray 5 daily prayers. The requirement for a Muslim that's an adult who's reached the age of puberty is that they must be praying 5 daily prayers. 5 daily prayers meaning the Salawat al-Khams, which is referred to as Fajr, Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib and Isha. And these specific prayers have timings. Now, in our time today, to discuss the entire timings of the prayer is something that will take a bit more time. Let's just summarize it as this, that the Salah times can be accessed by a timetable that's available from your local masjid, or if you're living in the land of the Muslims, then the authority there will announce or would publish the Salah times, as well as the adhan being there for you. So we just can give just a summary of the Salah. In general, Fajr is before the sun has risen or the disk of the sun breaks through the horizon, and it's when the daybreak begins. So when the sun is about to rise, and this is not when it's coming above the horizon and you can see the disk, rather before that the rays of the sun will come out. And this is a quick summary of it. There's 2 types of Fajr, but we're not going to go into that. That's a detailed discussion, but we're just going to say the break of dawn, and that's when the light of the sun is appearing in the distance, the rays of the sun. And this usually scatters across the horizon, so it's not like a one straight line, it's rather scattering up, and that is until the disk of the sun reaches the horizon. Until that sun disk breaks out, that's when you can pray Fajr. That's the time of Fajr. Dhuhr is when the sun moves past the middle point of the sky. As soon as it just passes the middle point, then it starts Dhuhr, and that ends until, as the hadith mentions about the length of a shadow, as the sun begins to descend. As that happens, Asr is all the way, and this is where Asr starts. Asr is until the time of when the sun begins to touch the horizon. So when the disk of the sun sets fully, this is when Salat al-Asr begins. And Maghrib begins when the sun is fully set, and now you see light in the distance, but the sun is descended completely. The disk is no longer present until the completely dark sky appears, which is the start of Waqt al-Isha, Salat al-Isha. And this is the night time, and some scholars differ on the actual opinion of whether Salat al-Fajr is till midnight or Thuluth al-Layl, there's different opinion on it, and some even say it starts until Fajr. So Wallahu Alam, the point is that we should be looking at this opinion, or whatever opinion you should discuss this. From what seems to be from the scholars' discussion is that it is until Fajr. Until Fajr. This is the common opinion among the scholars. Some say midnight, some say until Salat al-Fajr. But Wallahu Alam, this is again a situation where they'll have to look at evidences and a deeper discussion is needed. So here are the times for as-Salah, and this is when the prayer times begin. Now, from the conditions of the Salah, this is when a person now has the aim to pray. As we said already, Salah is an obligation. Every Muslim must do it. And the discussion, obviously, we haven't done yet is whether a person leaving the Salah what is his situation. This is again another discussion, a very deep discussion, but just to put it in summary, some of the opinions mention a person becomes a non-Muslim if he leaves his prayers. He knows it's obligation, but he abandons it because of laziness and kasal, as they say, like just complete laziness and being negligent with the Salah. Tahawun bis Salah, And some of the scholars, they say that he's a non-Muslim for this. This is a very strict opinion, and it's got its evidences, and it's quite severe warning to those that abandon the Salah. As for the other opinions, they mention that a person who stops praying is committing a very, very serious crime, and there must be a penalty for this through the court, the Islamic court. Basically, let's put it in a summary, that a person who misses the prayers is committing a very serious crime. Serious crime. It's like one of the completely worst sins. There's probably no sin comparable to missing Salah, like in terms of if you want to compare it to a sin that takes a person out the fold of Islam, then obviously if you consider that opinion, it's not, that doesn't take the person, obviously again, detailed study. The point being that it's a very serious crime. It's something that is very close to disbelief, and a person should be very aware of this, that you either fall into disbelief or you fall into a very, 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 very major crime, and really take that seriously. So leaving prayers is something that we should really be careful of. Other than this, they say, the scholars are all agreed upon, if a person denies the obligatory nature of salah, where they say prayer isn't required, or we don't have to pray, whether they pray 50 prayers, whether they pray all their salahs in their life, if they believe this, they are non-Muslims, because they've denied an obligation from the religion, that which is agreed upon by the Muslims and the Quran and the authentic Sunnah. So this is a very dangerous thing as well. But we have to mention that leaving prayers is something very, very serious, and we must be very careful of this. Now, before we start the prayer, there are some things we must be aware of. The first thing, that before you pray, there must be some conditions that are met. As they say, the shurut as-salah. And these shurut are that if a person doesn't have them, the prayer will not ever be accepted. Yani whether they pray properly in the complete way, the salah will not be accepted without these conditions. The first condition is the intention. Intention is that a person does the action for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if a person does the action for other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or without the correct intention of praying, then his salah will not be, his or her salah will not be valid. This is very serious, and a person should remember to rectify the intention, not to pray for their parents or for their friends or their family or anyone in particular, or just to be fitting in, rather pray for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. The second condition is being a Muslim. A person who now takes time to pray, even if he's a non-Muslim, he wants to just enjoy and see the salah and experience it. Well, that's an experience, but there's no reward for it, and they haven't fulfilled the obligation. So praying salah, all the salawat al-khamsa, without iman, there's no validity to that prayer, it won't be accepted. The third condition is being in the state of being sane, as they say. A person has to have his mind present, and know that when we say mind present, as in mental mind is present. If they don't even recall what they're doing, don't know what they're doing, this salah is not a salah, because they don't know what they've done. So salah in itself, the nature of it is that a person who wants to pray has to be in the state of saneness. Being at the age of understanding, because the scholars mention that if a person is praying, a child is praying, like you have some children, babies praying, they copy along with their parents. They don't actually know what they're doing. They're just following along and imitating the actions. They don't even, they can understand that there's an action going on, but they don't understand it's prayer. Now, the age of disagreement, scholars generally speaking differ on this actual meaning. And from the books of fiqh, from what's understood, is that if a child can differentiate between two different objects. So, for example, if I have a pencil and a knife, the child, if they can differentiate between the two and know what each object is, they've passed this age of disagreement, any age of understanding. If they cannot differentiate, that you give them a pencil or like a spoon, they will not know the difference. And you're just picking up an object. It won't differentiate. So this is not a child at the age of understanding, and thus their prayer will not be given any reward. So if a child prays with the correct intentions and everything fulfilled, and he understands what he's doing, and this inshallah ta'ala will be a salah that's rewarded and accepted before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Even though salah would not have been at that time, maybe the 5-6-year-old who knows what they're doing, at that specific time, maybe the salah will not have been an obligation upon them because they're under the age of puberty, but they will get rewarded and it will be accepted from them. The next stage, which is something we must mention, is that we've discussed before, the time of the prayer must be present. So if a person is praying in the time of salah, then it's accepted. Obviously, prior conditions have to be met as well. The conditions we mentioned before, the first 4 conditions previous to this, they must be met. But if a person, for example, prays outside of the time, the salah will not be accepted. Inna salata kana al-mu'minina kitabun mawquta. Yeah. So the salah is definitely being legislated at specific times. So a person cannot just choose and pray Dhuhr at Asr time, Asr at Maghrib time. This is not accepted. So it has to be done at the time that is present, at the specific time it's present. The next condition is to be in the state of purity. State of purity means either in the major form or minor form. Where a person starts the prayer and they are in the state of wudu, or if they've completely committed a thing that causes them to require a shower, a ghusl, they have done that. So if they're in the major state of impurity, they take ghusl, and if they're in the minor, they make wudu. Ghusl at the same time does cover, or if a person, for example, does ghusl, even if they want to make wudu, it's fine, it's accepted, because the ghusl is the greater form of purity and wudu is the lesser form. So if a person, for example, wakes up in the morning, has the need of making ghusl without even having to do ghusl, they just wake up in the morning, take a ghusl for the sake of praying, and then they go and pray, for example, dhuhr salah, that's perfectly fine, because or asr salah, that's considered to be a person who is in the state of purity. But regardless, whether if it's in the minor form where they broke their wudu and they make ghusl or wudu, it's fine. But if it's in the major form, they can only make ghusl to purify themselves, to be ready for that prayer. And once they have done that and they haven't nullified that wudu afterwards or broken their purity, then they can proceed to pray. And then the remaining parts are things that which consider the salah itself. So we talked about these conditions before the salah. This is now when you're about to start the prayer, is the next condition of facing the qibla at all means possible, where possible. Obviously this means if a person has no reason or no reason for missing the direction of the qibla, this is unacceptable. But if it's possible, impossible, and in some cases this could be when traveling on a specific, like an aeroplane for example, and they have to pray, they may not have control over that. Covering the private parts, or basically covering the body, satr al-awra, as they say. And this is something that we must mention to men and women, that they must cover the required areas for the prayer. They cannot pray unless they cover themselves correctly. And this is something that's very important, because if a person doesn't pray covering correctly, he or she, their salah will be invalid. So it's upon the person to really know and take effort with covering themselves when they pray. And the final one is to ensure that the place and the clothing does not have any impurities. Those things which are najis, impure, then again this cannot be acceptable, and the prayer will not be accepted if it's upon them or on the place that they pray. And the place that they pray is a bit different. We're talking about like a prayer mat, for example. You're praying on a prayer mat and that area is dirty, or the place is soiled in that thing, like completely, the area you're walking around is impure. This is an example of being a place that's dirty to pray in. As for, like if there's an object on the floor, like a small dot, and you pray on that area or vicinity of it, but you're not on top of it, this is not the same. This is not considered impurity directly in contact with you. As for the clothing, this is something that cannot be missed. If someone, for example, has urine on their clothes, or their own urine, or they have something like filthy like that along the lines of that, then it's considered that they have to change their clothing or wash it. And this is the required thing for them, for their salah to be accepted. And this is, as we mentioned, these are the conditions of the salah, and they must be met, otherwise the prayer will not be preceded and accepted. Now we'll proceed on to the essential components of the salah. These are things that you must have, the pillars of the prayer, and if they are missing intentionally or unintentionally, the salah is invalid. So if a person misses any of these, there's no excuse for this. They have failed to perform the prayer. So what starts off with the 14 points, as mentioned in summary, we're mentioning in summary quickly. The first is standing in the prayer, for those that can. So if a person is sitting and praying without any valid reason, for no reason at all, and they're not. Example of this is a person is has a injury in their leg. If that person has such an injury they cannot walk, or they cannot go to do their daily activities, in that case it's fine for them to sit, or however possible they can do the prayer. But we're talking about somebody who has no issues at all, and this is unacceptable. They have to stand and pray. This is a pillar of the prayer, and if they miss it, then this is invalidate the salah. The second is the takbir. Now, for the requirement for the takbir is just to say Allahu Akbar. It's enough to say that. As we know, the Sunnah of Prophet ﷺ, he would raise his hands up to his shoulders or his ears, up to here, Allahu Akbar, like this. But if a person is unable to, he doesn't do that. As long as he sounds it out from his tongue, Allahu Akbar, he or she says it, this is fine. But the most important thing is they have to say Allahu Akbar. If they say Allahu Akbar and then they start, or they raise their hands as well and say Allahu Akbar, this is fine. We're just giving you the obligatory, essential parts of the prayer, that if you miss it, then this will deem the prayer unworthy and unacceptable. The third thing is reciting Surah Al-Fatiha. As the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that there's no salah without Al-Fatiha. Then there is the bowing. The bowing also is a requirement of the prayer. A person must bow, and a person will rise up from the bow and stand. Now in these positions we have to mention that when a person bows, he must hold that position, right? And when he rises from bowing, he must also hold that. He shouldn't rise and then go straight down, because the standing from the bowing is again an arkan of the salah. A person cannot miss that. So they have to rise and stand. If they rise and go straight down, as some people do, you see some people, they rise, they go Sami Allah and go straight down. This is unacceptable. Haven't stood from the bowing. So holding the position is a crucial part. Then there's the sajda. The sajda is also a requirement. So the sajda, sitting between the sajda, and then so coming up from sajda and then sitting, and then going back into sajda again, as there's two sajdas. Now, in all of these previous actions, there must be all of these movements. So if a person stands up from the salah and comes back down again, ruku, and then standing, and then bowing, and then sajda, prostrating, and then sitting, and then prostrating again, there must be calmness and stillness in these processes. Again, this is a condition again from the salah, arkan of salah, the pillar of the prayer, that they must be calm when they're doing it. Then there's the final tashahhud, which is the statement of At-Tahiyyatu lillahi wa salawatu wa tayyibatu, Assalamu alayka ayyuhan nabiyyu wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Assalamu alayna wa ala ibadillah salihin. And then sitting for this statement, and Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, again, that's part of the tashahhud. And then sending salatul salam upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay? Sending salatul salam upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and ending the prayer with Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. And doing all these steps in the correct order. So we know that there's different salawat, some with 3, some with 2, some with 4. Whatever the orders are required of these steps must be done in the correct order. It can't be mixed around. So for example, a person can't go from standing to sujood and then stand up again and go bowing, and then this is salah is invalid. It has to be according to the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, in which we must do these steps in order. Now there are 8 actions that must be done, called wajibat as-salah. If they are missed, if anything causes a person to miss these components of the prayer, then this person must do something for it. So we're going to come to that inshallah later on. But the point is that if a person misses these following things, then it's regarded as they have not completed the prayer correctly. And we will discuss them inshallah ta'ala in the coming part. Now for this section here about the wajibat as-salah, if a person misses them intentionally, meaning he has missed them purposefully, knowing that he or she should say them, this has nullified the salah. So there's no excuse for missing this. But if they did it unintentionally, then in that case they will not be accountable for that if they did it forgetfully and unintentionally. And there are certain things that they should do for this, and we will cover that inshallah in another section inshallah ta'ala, what they should do. As for the 8 parts that are the wajibat of the prayer that they must fulfill without missing intentionally, is the following. Number 1 is saying Allahu Akbar, and all the rest of the time they should say Allahu Akbar. So for example, we have the prayer, you start the prayer standing, Allahu Akbar, and then Fatiha, and then you go down to bowing, Allahu Akbar, and then in the bowing, so all of this is Allahu Akbar is being said, and then when you rise from bowing, Sami Allahu liman hamidah, Rabbana lakal hamd, Allahu Akbar, all the way going down to sajda, Allahu Akbar. All the times you have to require to say Allahu Akbar, you should say the Allahu Akbar. We have a lot of videos on this channel, inshallah, about how to pray from the sunnah, and it discusses all of these points, and where a person should say the statements. But we're talking about a person has to say them. It's not something optional, they have to do it. The second is saying Sami Allahu liman hamidah from rising from the bowing, and then Rabbana wa lakal hamd. This is again wajibat as-salah. You must say this. So when a person bows and then rises from the bowing, they must say that. And saying Subhan Rabbil Azim and Subhan Rabbil A'la at least once. Subhan Rabbil Azim in bowing, and Subhan Rabbil A'la in the prostration. Has to be said at least once. And then we have number 6, which is saying the first tashahhud and sitting for the first tashahhud. Okay? So these are the major parts of the prayer that must be said, and a person cannot miss them. there's no excuse actually for missing them, and if a person misses them intentionally, then this has deemed their prayer invalid. If they have done it unintentionally, then there's something they can do for that, and we'll discuss that later on. Now we've discussed the 5 salawat. We're going to go into some other areas of prayer, and then we're going to talk about prostration of forgetfulness later on, which is the prostration you should make at the end of the prayer. So we're going to go into some issues regarding the congregational prayer. Now, the congregational prayer is something that scholars differ upon. Some of the scholars say that it's obligation upon every Muslim to pray every salah in jama'ah, in the masjid, and some of them say it's not. And there's a different level of discussion on this in a lot of detail. The point that we can just take from it is that it's very important and highly recommended, at least, to pray the salah in the masjid. So if we're going to go upon the opinion that's wajib, that's a discussion of evidences, and if we're going to consider the opinion that's really highly recommended, then that's another thing. So we'll just look at it from this angle, that it's 27 times more worthy to pray in the mosque or in the masjid and in jama'ah, and if a person can do that, then that's very noble of them, and they should try their best to push for. Again, it is the outward signs of Islam. If the Muslims together pray the salah, it's a sign of their virtue and honor and respect that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it's signs of Allah that are bestowed upon them. So a person should try, if they can, to pray. Now this is regarding the men. The women, as it stands, don't have to pray in the masjid or in jama'ah. But again, it's encouraged for anyone, if they can, pray in congregation, establish it in their houses. Sisters, for example, pray together whenever they go out in their own communities or in their own kind of places where it's easy to pray together and it's not in the sight of others. And this is good. This is a good thing to do, inshallah ta'ala. So we're saying in general, praying salah in congregation is encouraged. It's highly recommended at minimum for the men, and for women it's encouraged in general. But praying in their house is better for them. As for men, it's more better for them to pray in the masjid regarding congregational prayers. Now, concerning the fiqh rulings of joining and shortening the prayers, this again is a detailed fiqh discussion, and I'm trying my best not to go into too much detail because, as I said, this is a summary, and those discussions require a lot of deep understanding when it comes to fiqh and understanding those subjects. We're just going to go over a quick understanding of the voluntary prayers because, as we said, we're trying our best to summarize this as much as possible. So there are obviously optional actions in Islam, and among the optional actions which are aside from the 5 daily prayers. We said the 5 daily prayers are the 5 prayers that have to be prayed upon those 5 times of salah. This is Fajr, which is 2, Dhuhr, which is 4, Asr, which is 4, and Maghrib, which is 3, and Isha, which is 4. These are the only minimum requirements for a Muslim to pray. There are optional prayers that are recommended for him or her to do. And those prayers, if they do it, will cover up for the gaps in their obligations. As well as that, it will also bring them closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there are many types of optional prayers that one can do. Among them is entering the masjid, praying 2 rak'ah when you enter the masjid. So when you enter the masjid, it is from the sunnah to pray 2 rak'ah. There are also night prayers to pray, the night prayers. The time when... So there's 2 types of night prayer. There's one night prayer which is considered night prayer in general, which is any time after Isha. You pray, optional, it's considered night prayer. This is one type. The other type is after a sleep, and this is considered to be at tahajjud, where you wake up and any portion of the night you sleep, you wake up and pray too. This is considered at tahajjud. And it's more encouraged to delay your night prayers. If a person prays in the early part of for example, let's say adhan of Isha happens, and then they pray Isha, and then they pray night prayers directly after, 2 rak'ah, many a number without any kind of limit. They just pray let's say 5, 7, 10, 20, as many as they want. This is considered to be a night prayer, and it's part of the virtue of the people that pray night prayers. They are considered one, even though they only pray directly after Isha. If they prayed it after sleep and wake last, this is the more better time to pray, more virtuous time, as this is the time where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala descends to the lowest heaven and He asks who is there that's asking that I give to them, who is there that I should forgive. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala descends at this noble hour, the last third, and it's a time when the person should ask, and usually the dua will be accepted at this time. So that's regarding the night prayers. There is also the witr, which is the end of, you can say, the ending of the night prayers. A person should leave the witr to the end. It's more encouraged. If a person prays after witr, obviously it's not encouraged to do it that way. It's better to keep it at the end. That's a hadith the Prophet mentions, to keep it the last thing. But if a person does pray after it, it's not an issue, but it's not following the guidance of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but it's not a problem. But they should pray. Now, witr has a specific definition and description. There are 2 ways of doing it. I'm just going to mention the 2 quickest way. One of them is praying 3 without any sitting. So a person prays 3 straight without doing at-tahiyyatu at all, and then they leave it to the end. And the other way of praying is praying 2 and then praying 1. So praying 2 rak'ah and then praying 1. And the dua kunut in the witr is an option. It's not something that is a requirement actually for the witr. The witr is just a prayer which is prayed in an odd number, and it's different to maghrib. If you pray 3, you can also pray 1 witr if you want. You can pray unlimited number in odd numbers. So from up to 7, 5, like these numbers you can pray it. The point is that witr is just an odd number of rak'ah, and it's supposed to be different to like how you pray a normal odd prayer. So a person can pray 2, 2, 2, 2 and then 1 at the end. That's considered witr. A person can pray 5 in a row without any sittings, and then at the end he says the attahiyat. So completely 5 rak'ah without any sittings. It's just from prostration they rise up again, and prostration rise up again 5 times until the last one, and then they sit. So this is witr salah, and this should be, as we said, kept to the end. And then the other al-rawatib, sunnah al-rawatib. The Prophet ﷺ said, whoever prays 12 rak'ah of sunnah a day, Allah will build him a palace in Jannah. Some scholars say it's every day, some say it's if they are persistent upon it. Wallahu alam, this is again, whoever preserves it, as they say, hafidha. Anyway, the discussion of this is that if a person does it, inshallah, they'll have a palace in Jannah. Whether it's every day or not, it's from Fadlullah al-Azim. Yani Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is very giving and very virtuous to those that pray and do in His path. If a person does it every day and gets it, that's from a virtue of Allah. If he gets it for preserving it, it's a virtue from Allah. Regardless, the person will get something much greater than that which they can get in this dunya for doing something quite straightforward. We ask Allah to make us of those that do it. So we all should be encouraged. I push myself first and foremost to do that. The 12 rak'ahs are 2 before Fajr, 4 before Dhuhr, 2 after Dhuhr, 2 after Maghrib, 2 after Isha. These are the 12 rak'ah that a person should pray. Some hadith mention 10, which means that you pray 2 before Dhuhr and 2 after Dhuhr. That's the only difference. The 4 before Dhuhr becomes 2. But Wallahu alam, at the end of the day, if a person does it, it's very highly recommended. Inshallah ta'ala, it's very encouraged, and a person can. There's also Salat al-Duha. Salat al-Duha is the prayer that is prayed between after sun has risen fully and disk has risen from the horizon all the way up to before the sun reaches the middle point. And this time you can pray as many number as you want, and there's many reward for this. It's a very, very noble thing. Again, these are optional prayers, so a person does get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Also, it could also cover up for the mistakes and our obligations. And here is a summary of the optional prayers. There's Taraweeh as well. Taraweeh is basically the night prayer prayed in Ramadan, earlier after Isha, and it's just where Quran is recited. Does the Quran have to be finished? Is there a set number? Again, these are all differences of opinion. The Quran does not have to be finished from the strongest opinion that's out there. It's something encouraged if they can, there's no really issue if a person doesn't finish the Quran in Taraweeh. As for the number, scholars differ. This is again, it's an open ibadah, it's an optional ibadah. So if a person wants to pray with the Imam, he'll get the reward of praying half the night in prayer. So it's encouraged just to stand the nights of Ramadan in Salah, because the Prophet said, "Man qama Ramadan imanan wa ihtisaban ghufira lahu ma taqaddama min dhanbihi." The Prophet said, whoever stands the nights in prayer of Ramadan with iman, with faith and hoping for the reward from Allah, Allah will forgive all his past sins. So does the number really matter? If you look at it this way, that I want to stand in the nights just to get reward from Allah, really that's all that matters. If a person pays part of the night, some of the night, with the intention of this, every night he takes part in night prayers with the hope of getting reward from Allah, inshallah his sins will be forgiven. And this is just a brief summary of the optional prayers that are to be done on a daily basis. We now go on to the Friday prayer. Friday prayer is the day of Jum'ah, and this is usually Salat al-Dhuhr becomes basically 2 rak'ah. 2 rak'ah is the prayer, and there's the khutbah. Every person should pray Jum'ah. It's required from the Muslims to pray Jum'ah, and you cannot miss it. So Jum'ah is something that Muslims must do. They must pray in the masjid, and it's Dhuhr prayer. So effectively, it's one of the 5 pillars, one of the 5 prayers of a Muslim. So the Dhuhr becomes Jum'ah as 2, but it's still regarded as Dhuhr. And as we said, a person should pray, and in a communal gathering where they can fulfill Jum'ah Salah. There's a big discussion on Jum'ah and how it's supposed to be conducted. As we said, we're not going to go into that. All we're going to mention is that Jum'ah is a prayer that Muslims should pray, and it's usually done in a masjid on Fridays, where a khutbah is given, a sermon is given, and afterwards they pray 2 rak'ah in congregation. And the Muslims should gather and do this. As for the number of the gathering, this is just in summary. I'm not going to go into detailed discussion here. It's a large gathering, and this is the Friday prayer in a nutshell. Then we have the Salat al-Eid. Salat al-Eid is a communal obligation. The Muslim community should participate in it, and it's a communal obligation means that some part of the community must establish it, and if they establish it, then it's lifted from the rest. So meaning, people obviously wonder, is Eid Salah a wajib for every Muslim? It's not wajib for everyone to attend it if it's being conducted by some part of the community, thus making it a very highly recommended sunnah. So how is Eid Salah done? We're going to go over the quick details of how Eid Salah is done. It's usually prayed at the Salah time for Salat al-Duha, before the sun has reached the horizon, and a middle point, and before the sun, just after the sun has fully risen. So at the same time as we mentioned for Salat al-Duha, this is the time for Salat al-Eid. Now, how is Eid conducted? Salat al-Eid is conducted when a person starts the prayer, so Salat al-Eid is done on the 2 days of Eid. Eid al-Adha wa Eid al-Fitr. This is after al-Hajj and after Ramadan. So first being Ramadan, obviously, first being Ramadan, usually Ramadan, and then we follow on to al-Hajj. And this is not a long period of time between the two Eids. So you experience Ramadan, and then not very long after Hajj appears, after a couple of months after Ramadan. So then Eid Salah is done for both the same way. It's not different for one or the other. The first rak'ah is 2 rak'ah again. The first rak'ah is Allahu Akbar first time, and then 6 takbirat after. So when you say Allahu Akbar to start the prayer, then you say Allahu Akbar 6 times again, and then recitation, and then surah, and then bowing, and then prostration, then stand up. When you stand up again, you say takbir now 5 times, and then recitation, and so on. So this is the Eid prayer in a summary. So 6 takbir after the first takbir, and 5 takbir after standing up, when you stand up from the standing. So when you stand up, say Allahu Akbar, and then 5 takbirs. And that's the Eid prayer in a nutshell. Where is it to be conducted? It's usually conducted in an open place. And that's the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. If done like in a park, or in the Muslim lands, they do it they have an Eid specific area, location outside the city, or within a big area in the city where they can fulfill it outside. If it's done in a masjid, it's not an issue, inshallah ta'ala. After the salah, there's a sermon, and again, the sermon is an option to listen to it. If a person wants to leave, they may leave. That's not an issue. This is the general nutshell of Eid Salah for the Muslims. Then we have they have 2 other salahs which are another optional salawat. Stressed is the prayer for asking for rain. Now, in the land of specifically in the hot regions of the Muslim world where it doesn't rain that often, in those parts where it rains very less, then a person, or they're going through a drought, they should usually pray the Salat istisqa. Salat istisqa is the prayer for asking Allah for rain. Talab al-matar, you're requesting Allah to send upon us rain. And this prayer is usually conducted, in fact, the actual characteristics of it in the whole salah is just basically the same as Eid. It's done in the same way. So it's recommended for the Imam to announce this prayer like a couple of days before, and get people encouraged to take part in it. And this is Salat Istisqa. It's done at the same time of Eid, in the same characteristics, same way it's performed. So this is the Salat Istisqa. When we say same characteristics, we mean the takbirat and the way you pray Eid prayer. Then we have Salat al-Khusuf. Salat al-Khusuf is a prayer that is done at the time of eclipse, usually a very lengthy prayer. It has a number of bowings in it, and this description will take quite some time to explain. Inshallah ta'ala, this will require detailed discussion in fiqh. Has different ways of praying it. We're just going to keep it simple, that there is a prayer that when eclipse take part, it's from the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that Muslims should show that Allah has power over the heavens and the earth, and we should fear Him. We're not doing it to get closer to Allah through the planets or anything like this. No, this is not from the belief of our Muslims. Rather, it's just to show awe and servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and obedience to Him and fear of Him, and the fact that He has power over the universe, and we should fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's why the prayer is done. And usually the confirmed way of doing it is there are several bowings done in between. So a person reading long surah, Allahu Akbar, long surah, bowing, then rising, and then long surah again, and then bowing, and then prostration, and then up again, and then again when they read the second rak'ah, bowing, and then rising again from the bowing and carrying on reading, and then bowing again, and then and then finishing the prayer. And the entire prayer should be lengthy. Even the bowing should be lengthy. The 2 bowings that are done in the first rak'ah and the 2 bowings that are done in the second rak'ah. As I said, detailed discussion required of all the main elements of it. This is just a quick summary of it. And some obviously scholars say that it's permissible to also do additional bowings in the first and second rak'ah. Wallahu alam, this is just a quick summary of it, but it's a very lengthy prayer. The sajdas, the rukus, the salah in general should be very long. It should be very long. And it's something that when the time eclipses is recommended to do it. Finally, we're going to finish this whole subject of salah in regards to the salat al-janaza. Salat al-janaza is a prayer that is done over the deceased, and after a person has passed away and they've washed the body, shrouded it, and is ready to be buried, they will do the salat al-janaza. Salat al-janaza is done in the following ways. A person starts with 4 takbeers and raising their hands. So it's recommended to raise the hands, and when they say the first takbir, Allahu Akbar, they say A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, Bismillahir rahmanir rahim, Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. They say Surah Al-Fatiha, and then they say Allahu Akbar. Second rak'ah, they say Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim innaka Hamidum Majid. Allahumma barik ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad kama barakta ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim innaka Hamidum Majid. After this, they say Allahu Akbar for the third, and then they make dua for the deceased. There are many du'as from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ to make. And finally, once they have done this, they say Allahu Akbar, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and they give 1 salam or 2, but it's from the Sunnah to say 1. But this is again something of difference, and it will maybe require detailed study. Wallahu alam, this is a brief general summary over the salawat, and there are many ways of praying for the deceased. In this prayer, there's many authentic narrations regarding the du'as that should be mentioned in the salah. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make this series very beneficial. We have come with this briefly summary, completed the summary of the salawat. Now, as we were saying, there was one more element that we missed out, which is sajdat, the prostration of forgetfulness. Sajdat sahu. And this is when a person has missed something from the prayer that's like a statement or something along the lines of that, or they forgot whether they have done a rak'ah or they missed a prostration. And in this case, they're not sure how many rak'ah they're on or whether they're on sajda or not. And they try to go and do what they know by the closest that they are. After this, when they're ending the prayer right at the end, they make Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and then they do make 1 salam, 2 sajdas. And sajdas are done the same way you would do in the prayer, but right at the end of the prayer this time. And afterwards, when they finish the salah, they say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. When they finish the 2 sajdas, they get up from the second sajda and they say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Once this is done, inshallah, this will cover for any mistakes in the prayer. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make this as a beneficial for you and those that are listening. Inshallah, we ask Allah to make us act upon the knowledge that we have been conveying here. Wallahu a'lam wa sallallahu wa sallam wa barak ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.